I counted the days by the feeding cycle, because the Concorde never gave me a clock. 41 feedings. 41 times the wall panel slid open and a tray came through with something gray and dense that kept me alive without telling me anything about how long I'd been gone. They called the room a study chamber, which was generous. White walls, white floor, a cot bolted down, and 4 recessed lenses in the ceiling that never blinked. I was Lieutenant Mara Voss, United Earth Survey Corps, and 3 months ago I had been running a quiet recon pass along a contested drift lane when something with no running lights took my shuttle apart around me and put me in a box. The ones who ran the box called themselves the Ethereal Concorde. I learned that much from the one who talked to me, a narrow, patient creature named Sael, segmented like a millipede dipped in slate, who came twice a feeding cycle to ask questions and watch instruments read my answers off my blood and my breath. The Concorde wasn't one species. It was a coalition of small allied worlds, none of them strong enough alone to matter, all of them strong enough together to have built a station with 400 research bays and a deterrent program 3 centuries deep. I was the newest entry in that program. Sael didn't hide it from me, not because of any kindness, but because the Concorde didn't believe secrecy mattered when the subject couldn't leave. They wanted to know how a human body failed. Heat tolerance, blood loss thresholds, sleep deprivation curves, pain response under controlled stimulus. They were building something. A template, Sael called it once, for a deterrent weapon modeled on whatever they decided humanity actually was. They had encountered humans exactly once before, in the wreck of my shuttle, and they intended to build their entire first impression of my species out of what they could extract from one tired lieutenant in a white room. "You do not scream as the others did," Sael told me on the 38th feeding, after a session with the heat coils that left blisters across my forearm. Its translator voice was flat, clinical, genuinely curious rather than cruel. "The others. What others? There have been others before me." It didn't answer. It rarely answered the questions that weren't on its list. I stopped giving them clean data around feeding 20. Not defiance exactly, just a soldier's instinct to control the only variable left to me. I controlled my breathing through the heat tests. I slowed my pulse through the isolation tests. I gave them numbers that didn't add up to fear, because fear was the one thing I still had that was mine, and I wasn't handing it over on a tray. What I didn't tell Sael, because it never thought to ask, was that my unit had a standing protocol for operatives gone dark past 72 hours. I didn't know if anyone had triangulated the drift lane. I didn't know if the Vanguard was still in this sector or 3 systems away running picket duty. I didn't know anything, and that not knowing was its own kind of weight I carried through every feeding cycle. Quiet, load-bearing, never spoken aloud because speaking it aloud would have given the lenses something else to measure. There were stretches, especially after the worst sessions, when I let myself imagine the search the way I'd been trained to imagine a contingency, not as hope, which felt dangerous in that room, but as a procedure I could walk through in my head to keep from walking through anything else. A picket pattern widening out from my last reported vector, a handler back at the depot flagging my silence at the 72-hour mark exactly the way the manual said she would. It wasn't comfort, it was structure, and structure was the only thing the Concorde hadn't found a way to take a measurement of. Sael asked me once, almost as an aside, what I believed my people would do if they learned where I was. I told it the truth, because lying took more energy than I had to spare by then. I told it I didn't know, and that not knowing wasn't the same as not trusting. It logged the answer without comment, the way it logged everything, and for a moment I wondered if trust was even a concept its instruments had a column for. On the 42nd cycle, the station alarms didn't sound the way I expected them to. They didn't sound like an intrusion, they sounded like confusion, overlapping tones, contradictory, Concorde crew shouting in 3 languages through the wall vents. I'd learned enough of the cadence by then to know panic when I heard it, even through plating. Sael came into the chamber once, fast, none of its usual unhurried precision, and looked at me with an expression I couldn't read on a face that wasn't built to carry human expressions at all. "Your vessel," it said. "It is not concealing itself." I didn't understand what that meant until the far wall of my chamber, the one I'd always assumed was solid to the station's hull, turned out to be close enough to an outer viewport that the breach crews cut straight through into ambient starlight, and I saw it. The Vanguard wasn't hiding. It came in low over the station's dorsal ring, with running lights blazing, no stealth profile, no diplomatic hail, engines lit hard enough to throw a wash of blue fire across the hull plating of 3 Concorde interceptors scrambling too late to form a line. It didn't look like a ship trying not to be noticed. It looked like a ship that had already decided being noticed was the entire point. I'd seen the Vanguard 100 times from the inside, in dock, in transit, ordinary as a commute. I had never seen it from outside, lit up like that. And for one disorienting second I understood why every alarm on the station had gone wrong-footed at once. The Concorde had spent 3 centuries building a deterrent model out of one captured lieutenant's pain thresholds. They had never modeled this, a ship that announced itself on purpose, that treated the threat of being seen as leverage instead of risk. The breach team came through the cut hull in formation, 4 operators in hard suits, and the lead one had her visor up before the air had even finished equalizing, because she wanted me to see a human face first. Sergeant Kelly Mara. I'd run drills with her for 2 years. She didn't say anything dramatic. She said, "On your feet, Lieutenant," like we were finishing a training exercise instead of starting a war, and that ordinariness did more to steady my hands than anything else could have. The firefight that followed lasted 4 minutes by the suit chrono, which felt both impossibly short and like its own kind of eternity. Concorde security drones came down the corridor in a pattern built for crowd suppression, not for soldiers who'd trained against worse. Kell's team didn't waste rounds. They moved like the corridor was already theirs, because in every sense that mattered, it already was. One of the operators, a corporal I didn't recognize, took a glancing hit across the shoulder plate and didn't break stride. He just adjusted his angle and kept the line moving. And I understood in that small, unremarkable moment more about what the Concorde was facing than any sensor reading could have told them. There was no panic in that corridor. There was just work, done competently, by people who had decided in advance that this outcome wasn't negotiable. I watched Sail Eero flatten itself against the chamber wall, segmented body rigid, watching me get pulled upright by people who had crossed open space and broken atmosphere on a station belonging to a coalition of 41 worlds, for one operative, without hesitation and without a plan that involved staying quiet about it. We made the Vanguard's boarding ramp with the station's last interceptor screen still trying to reorganize behind us. I looked back once, through the closing bay door, and saw Sail Eero standing in the wrecked chamber where it had spent 42 cycles measuring exactly how much a human body could absorb before it broke. It wasn't looking at the damage. It was looking at the Vanguard's hull lights through the breach, and even with a face I couldn't read, I understood the shape of what had just happened to its data. They hadn't been wrong that I could be measured. Heat tolerance, blood loss, sleep deprivation, all of that was real, all of it recorded, all of it true. What they'd missed, what no instrument in that white room had been built to register, was that none of it was the actual variable. The variable was what came when the measuring stopped and the people I belonged to decided to come get me anyway, in full view, at full burn, because that was simply what we did. Kell got my restraints off somewhere over the ring, and the ship's deck plating hummed under my bare feet with the particular, unglamorous vibration of an engine, doing exactly what it was built to do. I didn't cry and I didn't shout. I sat down on the cold deck of a human warship for the first time in 42 days and just breathed, slow and even, the way I'd trained myself to in that white room. Except now there was nothing left to control it for. The Concorde had spent 3 centuries asking what a human being would do under pressure they designed. They got their answer in 4 minutes, and it didn't come from me at all.